250 years of Georgia's history inside of it, including the bench that Forrest Gump sat on. On your right, these were all old cotton warehouses, also built in the mid-1800s. Farmers would bring their cotton from inland Georgia to the port of Savannah, store it right there, and then it would have distributed throughout the world. But this first cotton warehouse on your right has been restored by the Savannah College for art design. This one is now studios and classrooms. And you will hear me refer to them throughout the tour as SCAD. That's their initials, as we call them for short. They started here in 1979 with only 71 students. Last year, before the pandemic started, they had over 14,000 students. Now take a good look at the building right here on your right, because we're going to compare it with one that's right behind it. Bam. Now they actually did have plans to fully restore that building also. But just as they were finishing up the first one, the roof started to collapse on that one. And unfortunately, they were not able to save the roof. So what they did is they shored up some of the sidewalls with these big blue beams. So basically, it's what I call a shell of a building. Well, y'all take a look through the openings. You're going to see the big blue beams, but you're also going to see palm trees and cabanas, picnic tables and sand, because they have turned it into what they call SCAD Beach. Pretty unique thing to do with a shell of a building, right? Now the building on your left here is one of their many dormitories. The unique thing about that building, though, is that it is the very first building they built brand new from the ground up. See, they prefer, if they can get a hold of them, to buy and restore the old building. In fact, they have restored right around 80 buildings so far, inside and surrounding the historic district. They've really done quite a lot for the restoration here in Savannah. Now, before we actually get into the historic district, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of Georgia. On April 21st, 1732, King George II of England granted a charter to James Oglethorpe and 20 trustees to found the colony of Georgia. Now, Oglethorpe, he actually handpicked 114 settlers. See, he wanted people that were honest, hard-working, and didn't want to start a new business. So they set sail on the ship Dan, and they arrived at Yamacraw Bluff, which is what we now call Savannah, February 12th, 1733. Now, when they arrived here, they met an Indian chief by the name of Tom Chichi. Now, Tom Chichi was the chief of the Yamacraw Indians, and he was almost 7 foot tall, had only one good eye, and had bear claws tattooed all over his chest. Now, y'all, that's mud wrestling and tractor pulling. How cultural can you get, right? But also inside there is the Johnny Mercer Theater, named for the singer and songwriter who was a native to Savannah. He did such songs as Days of Wine and Roses, You Must Have Been a Beautiful Baby, and of course one of my favorites, Moon River.
Wider than a mile, I'm crossing you in style someday.
Now, to your right, we have the Independent Presbyterian Church. The congregation of this church goes all the way back to 1755. Now, they built their first church on this site in 1819, but then it got destroyed by the Great Fire of 1889. So they had to rebuild, and this one on your right was completed in 1891. Woodrow Wilson married his first wife in the manse of this church where the preacher lived. And it is from the steeple of this church, which is the tallest one in Savannah, at 227 feet, that the feather floated down in the beginning of the movie, Forrest Gump. Now, we'll actually get a little better view of that steeple once we get into the square. There's an opening I'll show you where to look through. But we are pulling into stop number 2. Please remain seated until we come to the complete stop and open up the doors here at number 2. The statue in the center is of Sergeant William Jasper. He was an American Revolutionary War hero that always carried the flag, the colors in the battle. Mortally wounded in the siege of Savannah, October 9, 1779, he is the only non-commissioned officer to have a statue erected in his honor for that war. Then we have the Green Meldrum House here on your right. This was built by John Norris for a British gentleman named Charles Green at a cost of $93,000. At that time, it was by far the most expensive home in Savannah. But when Sherman came to Savannah on his famous march to the sea, Charles Green offered his home to Sherman. He did this so that none of the native Savannahans had to host the enemy in their house. So Sherman used that house as his headquarters. It is from there that he sent this message to President Lincoln, and the message said, "I beg to present to you, sir, the city of Savannah as a Christmas gift with 150 heavy guns, plenty of ammunition, and approximately 25,000 bales of cotton. The city of Savannah surrendered to Sherman December 23rd, 1864, without a single shot fired. On your left, we have a red brick building with rounded arches and two cannons out front. This was built by William Preston in the Romanesque style of architecture. Although it used to be the Savannah Volunteer Guards Armory, it is now owned by SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design. In fact, that's the very first building they bought and restored as part of their campus when they started here. Now they've turned it into a store now called ShopSCAD. And as for some of the art students actually display and sell some of their original artwork. Next, we're headed into Monterey Square, named for the American victory in Monterey in the Mexican War. The monument in the center of this square is dedicated to Count Casimir Pulaski. He was a Polish nobleman that helped us out during the American Revolutionary War. He was the highest foreign-ranking officer to serve us. He also died in the siege of Savannah. But he's also known as the father. You have to go down that way. You have to go to one of the stops. I can't pick you up here. No, that's not a stop. You have to go down to the pumpkin-colored house that way. Okay, he's the only non-commissioned officer of a statue erected in his honor for that war. Oops, that's not what I'm talking about. He's at Count Casimir Pulaski is actually buried underneath that monument, too. Savannah is a city built upon its dead, you'll see as we go along the tour. The Twin Mirrors houses here, built by John Norris, are identical on the inside and the outside. John Norris built for a Presbyterian minister who wanted the homes for his twin daughters because they argued about everything. And they say they actually stood right out front there and argued about who get the right side and who get the left side. You know they probably do. Next, this is it, the house made famous by the book of the movie Midnight, the Garden of Good and Evil. This is the Mercer Williams house. Also designed by John Norris, but for Confederate General Hugh Mercer as his family home. He was the grandfather of Johnny Mercer. Now, if you look to the left of the front door, it's partially obscured by that bush. There's another set of double windows, but that is where the study is located at. And that is where Jim Williams allegedly shot his friend Danny Hansford. Now, it took him 4 trials and a lot of money, but he did finally get himself acquitted of that murder on the 4th trial. At the next corner, the yellowish-colored building down there is the Temple Mikvah Israel. That is the only Gothic-style synagogue in the United States today, and they are the 3rd oldest Jewish congregation in the U.S. Coming up on our right here is the Armstrong House, built by a wealthy shipping merchant in 1917 as a single-family dwelling. The fence around this house is an exact replica of the fence around Buckingham Palace, and the bricks covered in marble dust. Then in front of us is the White Marine Monument dedicated to the Marines from Savannah who lost their lives in World War I. And further back beyond that is a big white fountain. That's the Forsyth fountain. That fountain was erected in 1858, but we actually ordered that fountain out of a mail order catalog from New York City. Page 5 if you want one, y'all. It's actually a replica of one from France. But we did. We got it from good old New York. Now take a look to your right again, because this is still the Armstrong house. Now remember I said it was built originally as a single-family dwelling. Then it became Armstrong College until the college finally outgrew it. Then it became the law office of Sonny Seiler. Sonny Seiler was the lawyer for Jim Williams during those 4 murder trials. Now it was bought about a year ago and restored again to be a single-family residence. Now, in between these 2 homes up on pedestals are 2 green pineapples. The pineapple is the universal symbol of hospitality. If a host would have you over, let's say, for a dinner party with drinks and friends, why, you'd see 2 pineapples up on the mantle so you'd eat, drink, and be merry. Have a grand old time. But later on in the evening, if you look back on the mantle and those pineapples are gone, that means the party is over. Time for you to leave. But unique way of ending a party, right? Now here's that portrait of Tom and Chi-Chi I was telling most of y'all about. That's the one in the middle. You see the bear claws tattooed there on his chest. The young man next to him is his son. His son also made the voyage over there. Now the building is called Hodgkin Hall. It's the home of the Georgia Historical Society. It has over 50,000 manuscripts and transcripts of Georgia's history inside of it. Oglethorpe's original compass. And they are the third oldest historical society in the United States. Also, you may have noticed a different style of architecture on the homes here, right? Because we have entered the Victorian district. Look to your left in the park, you're going to see a big, huge monument with a soldier up on top of it through the trees, right here. Now that soldier right there is facing the north. So that means he's facing his enemy. That's right. That's the Confederate War Monument. Now that monument was paid for by the wives and daughters of the Confederate soldiers who lost their lives in the Civil War. Now the ladies had the monument made all the way up in Canada, out of Canadian sandstone. Their dead, but it was just back down here as well. It was not allowed to touch it. They literally shipped that monument to the Atlantic Ocean until it got back down here to the south. See, it had only been about 10 years since the war had ended, so we feel quite certain there was still some hurt feelings going on there. Now we're going around Forsyth Park here. Laid out in 1851, the park encompasses 30 acres. Now we have all kinds of events in this park. We have concerts here, sporting events, picnics in the park, farmers markets, and both Union troops and Confederate troops did camp out in this park. But of course, not at the same time. Next, coming up on our left, you're going to see the Spanish-American War Monument. Nicknamed the Hiker, right there. Dedicated to the men from Savannah that helped Cuba fight in that war. Now, coming up in the corner on our right is what is now the Telfair Arms Apartments. It's now a senior's residence. But it was originally built as the Telfair Hospital. You'll see it says so in front of the building in big bold letters as soon as we get past these great myrtles here. And here it is, Telfair Hospital, in big bold letters in the front of the building. You see, this was built by a very wealthy philanthropist named Mary Telfair. Now, Mary was known around these parts as Our Lady of Stipulation. That's because this woman had a stipulation for everything that she gave away, donated, or helped to build. Now, her first stipulation for all buildings was that the Telfair name be in big bold letters in the front of the building. But then she had the Telfair Hospital built as a hospital for women, didn't be run by women, and only women went to that hospital. The only way that a man could get that hospital right there was to be born there. Then he had 3 days to get out. That was Mary, Our Lady of Stipulation. You know, she never did get married. It's actually kind of sad story. Mary was quite a pretty girl, but her and her younger sister fell in love with the same man, William Hodgkin. Now to Mary, William was the love of her life. She wanted no other. But he did choose Margaret, her younger sister. Now they, of course, got married. And then to make matters even worse for Mary, y'all, they ended up moving in with her into her house. And she even outlived them both, too. Poor Mary. Now we're going to talk about a very important committee that meets here monthly. It's called the Historic Review Board. These are the folks that set the rules and regulations for everything you can do to the outside of your home or building inside the historic district, even down to the color of the paint. The reason for this is to keep the historical integrity and accuracy of the different areas intact. For example, on your left is the mansion on Forsyth Park. This is a 5-star, 3-diamond hotel with 126 rooms, 16 suites, full-service spa, art gallery, and culinary school. But part of this was built in 1858 as a family home, and the rest is new. But by following the guidelines of the Historic Review Board, they blend into the old with the new very well. The old house is right here in the corner. And if you look at the back of the building, you can see a black canopy. Right before the black canopy starts is where the old house ends and the new begins. They did a good job of it too, didn't they? Now we're going to be pulling this up for I'm leaving 4 with a code of 14. Now the trees that line this park are called live oak trees. It's a state tree in Georgia. It's called a live oak because it does not shed its leaves all at the same time. It'll shed some in the spring and some in the fall. So it remains partially green all year long. Which also means, lucky us, we get to rain twice a year instead of once a year. Take a look to your right at the oldest live oak tree in the city of Savannah, the beautiful Candler oak tree. Y'all, that oak tree is nearly 400 years old. You make some tree house in that tree, couldn't you? But think about it. We are in a downtown city. The fact that neither man nor nature has harmed that tree in all this time, well, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? And we're going to be headed into my favorite square, Calhoun Square, named for John C. Calhoun, Vice President under Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. The unique thing about this square, though, is that it is the only one left with all original homes and buildings surrounding it. In other words, if you were standing in the middle of the square in 1892, it looked just like it does today, except for the cars and trolleys going around. On your left, we have the Wesley Monumental United Methodist Church, dedicated in 1891 to John and Charles Wesley. And then across the street on your right is the Massey Heritage Museum now. But that was originally built in 1857 as the very first public school in the state of Georgia. It was called the Massey School because it was named after the man who donated the land. The museum tells you all about what school life was like in the mid to late 1800s, all about how the original city plan of 24 squares was laid out, and all the different styles of architecture that we do have here in Savannah. Please remain seated until we come to a complete stop here at number 5. David chopped up all the wood desk and the firewood because it was considered to be one of the coldest Decembers on record that year in 1864. And we'll touch on that a bit more when we get to the cemetery. But once the Civil War ended and we got the building back, well, we turned it right back into a school. Only this time we turned it into the first freedmen's school in the state of Georgia, teaching young African-American children their reading, writing, and arithmetic. Take a look at the bricks on this house. These are called Savannah gray brick. That's because those bricks were all handmade by the slaves on the Hermitage plantation using Savannah gray riverfront. At one time, those bricks were worth more than the homes were. You could get anywhere from $3 to $5 per brick. Then the restoration movement began. The value of the properties went back up, so people stopped selling their homes and carriage houses brick by brick. The bricks are still quite valuable to this day, though, because they're so rare, and of course they don't make them anymore. Now we're headed into Lafayette Square, named for the Marquis de Lafayette, a French major general that helped us out during the American Revolutionary War. He was the aide-de-camp to George Washington. Now to your left in the corner there, that beige house with the dark green shutters is the Andrew Lowe house. Andrew's son William married Julia Gordon. And so Julia Gordon Lowe founded the Girl Scouts in the back of that house in the carriage house, March 12, 1912. She lived in that home till she died in the upstairs bedroom in 1927. Then here on your right is a beautiful Hamilton Turner Inn. Built in 1873, though, as a family home for Samuel Hamilton, his wife, and 2 children. Now, Samuel was the owner of the first electric company here, so his home was the first to have electricity. So because of the novelty of all that, the very first couple of weeks, people actually lined the square at dusk waiting to see whether when Samuel flicked that switch, the house either lit up or blew up. Oh, yeah. Then here on your right is the beautiful Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. The oldest and largest cathedral in the state of Georgia, opened up in 1873. Now, it looks like they're having a funeral right now, so the church is not open for touring. And that's one of the reasons why I tell you, you can go around as many times as you want, y'all. Go around, look at things, come back later on in the afternoon. It should be open. It's closed from 11:30 to 12:30 for church services also. Like I said, if you don't want to be back here till around 1 o'clock to see the church. You're not pulling into stop number 6. Please remain seated until we come to a complete stop and open the doors. Stop number 6. Liberty, a guerrilla warfare type group during the American Revolutionary War that helped us win over the British. Coming up on our right, you're going to see a little playground. The playground is the actual area of the old famous dueling grounds. That's where men would come to settle their differences. Why they stand back to back, walk 10 or 12 paces, then turn around and shoot. But looky here, conveniently located next to the dueling grounds, the cemetery. Those losers didn't have very far to go, did they? Colonial Park Cemetery was opened up in 1750 and then closed for burials in 1853. But when Sherman occupied the city of Savannah, some of his troops also camped out here. To make room for their tents, they just knocked down some of the headstones. But remember I said it was one of the coldest Decembers on record that year? Well, they literally broke into the crypts, threw out the bodies, and slept in there for warmth. Ew, right? Yep. Then to amuse themselves, they thought it'd be a lot of fun to change some of these inscriptions on the headstones. There are some people in this cemetery dead before they're even born. Some are 400 and 500 years old. And you can tour the cemetery during the daylight hours. Now on your left is one of our many fire stations. Savannah has the first motorized fire department in the United States. Probably because of all our experiences with great fires, we didn't have just one, we had 3 of them. The first one was the worst one in 1796, destroying over 2/3 of the city. Then we had one in 1820 and one in 1889. Now y'all, let's to your left again at our Faithian fire bell. Take a look at Big Duke. Big Duke weighs in at 5,500 pounds. The bell was used to alert settlers of fires in the different squares, to welcome troops home for battles and wars, and for different holidays and celebrations. It is actually shaped just like the Liberty Bell, and even has a crack in it too. Coming up in the corner, this 2-tone brown home, built in 1820 in the English Regency style of architecture, is the birthplace of Juliet Gordon Low. You'll see the Girl Scout emblem and the Iron Gate there. Juliet was born in this house on Halloween night in the year 1860, and Girl Scouts come from miles around to visit the birthplace of their founder. In fact, they even get a patch now for touring that house. Look to your left again in the median. This little monument right here marks the spot that Oglethorpe gave to the early Jewish settlers as their burial ground. 42 Jewish refugees arrived on the banks of the Savannah River on July 11, 1733. However, when they arrived here, the trustees were going to turn them away. They were not going to let them enter the colony. But then Oglethorpe discovered that not only did they have several skilled craftsmen and tradesmen, they also had a doctor, and we didn't. Our doctor, Dr. Cox, had died about 4 weeks before they arrived. And at the time of their arrival, we had a typhoid fever outbreak going on. Several colonists had died. So Oglethorpe decided for the good of the colony to go against the trustees. He let them into the colony, and the doctor, Dr. Samuel Nunez, immediately started tending to the sick. It took him about 4 or 5 weeks to get the outbreak under control, so then Oglethorpe gave them all land, just like he would have anybody else, so they would be landowners. So because of Oglethorpe and Dr. Samuel Nunez, that's the reason why we do have the 3rd oldest Jewish congregation in the U.S. On your left here is the Jefferson Art Center, built as an addition to the Telfair Art Museum, which is also in the square. Inside there is a 2-story museum for children called ALL.IT. They have some little hands-on projects they can do. Now the next 3 buildings to your right are our federal buildings. The first one on your right is called the Juliet Gordon Low Federal Building. It's the first federal building to be named after a woman. Now this one in the middle here used to look just like the other 2. And we're not quite sure how they ever got past the Historic Review Board. They look nothing like the buildings in this square anywhere around here whatsoever. So we have nicknamed these buildings our bathroom tile buildings. Next, check out our cat eye windows. If you come here at night when the lights are on, this building does look like 2 yellow cat eyes glaring out at you right there. Then up in the corner on our left is the old Telfair Mansion. It's now the Telfair Art Museum. It's called the Telfair Academy of Arts and Sciences. Now, it was originally built as a family home for Alexander Telfair, Edward's son, and designed in 1818 by William Tay, a famous architect from Bath, England. Now, when Alexander died, though, he left his home and all the Telfair money to his sister Mary. Y'all remember Mary, right? The Lady of Stipulation. So when Mary died, she left the home to the Georgia Historical Society, but with several stipulations. Now, her first stipulation was easy enough. She loved art, wanted everybody to be able to appreciate it, so she wanted her home turned into an art museum. So in 1886, the Telfair House became the first public art museum here in the South. Then she stipulated that her portrait, which is hanging in the dining room, must never be removed in perpetuity, which of course means forever and ever and ever. Then she said there is to be no eating, no drinking, no smoking, or amusement of any kind in her home. And believe me, y'all, she checks up on them too. But that's a ghost story for another day. Now we are going to be entering the city market district started by the early settlers in 1755. This is where they would have come to trade all their goods at. It's now where our newest museum is located at, the one and only one of its kind, the American Prohibition Museum. Telling you all about 13 years of Prohibition and how those coppers chasing those bootleggers started NASCAR. There are many wax figures inside there, some that interact with you and guide you along your way and tell you the stories of Prohibition. There's one Al Capone. There's also a Model T Ford, Tommy guns. They teach how to do the Charleston. There's an authentic speakeasy with authentic drinks. But to get into that speakeasy, you got to know the password. And the password is Sue. Yeah, y'all, just tell them Sue sent you, they'll let you in. Now, if any of y'all on board good for up to 5 people. Now, we are going to be pulling into stop number 7 at the city market. And if you are getting off here, it's been my pleasure and privilege to tell you about Savannah. I hope you've enjoyed your tour with me. Tips are greatly appreciated, but please remain seated till we come to a complete stop and open up the doors here at number 7.
7 pala ito.
Now, y'all, if you have not tried praline from Savannah yet, you are truly missing out. There are 2 more candy stores on River Street, and all 3 of them give out free samples. So you gotta at least try them, right? Note all 3 of them in wanted. Now, to the left is the Club 1. That is where the fabulous and flamboyant Lady Jubilee used to appear on a regular schedule. She was in the book Midnight in the Garden of Good People, and she played. Going to the right, stay on this road to the dead end, and you end up on Tybee Island.
Tybee Island.
Now this whole area to your left is what was once known as Yamacraw Bluff. It is the 42-foot bluff that overlooks the Savannah River where Oglethorpe established the colony. Now we chose this site because of its height above the river, its closeness to the freshwater, and the fact that it was inland about 13 miles. Next we have a big red brown brick building coming up on our left. That's the Bohemian Hotel. FYI, if you get a chance, go into the Bohemian. Take the elevator to rocks on the roof. It's a great view of the river and the bridge, especially in sunset. They love for people to come in here, y'all, so just walk in there like the Elwood place. Next building coming up on our left with the Gold Dome is City Hall. But look behind City Hall, you're going to see a green sign that says River Street. That's from the elevator that'll take you down to the river and back up again. Now, City Hall here was built in 1905 and it cost $205,000, but it originally had a copper dome on it. It wasn't until early 1980 when we found out that Atlanta was put a gold dome on their City Hall. Well, we couldn't have that. Oh no. They were going to have a gold dome, we had to have one too. This we're now sitting on Bull Street, named for William Bull, the surveyor of the city of Savannah, and the first street laid out here. Now, think about this though, y'all. City Hall is sitting right behind us, which means that City Hall is sitting right at the end of Bull Street. I have a code of 24 at Johnson Square. Now, this is our first square laid out. This was Johnson Square, named for Robert Johnson, the royal governor of South Carolina when the colony was founded. Now, this square was a social gathering spot for the early settlers. It was the first one, the largest one, and the closest one to the water. This is where they had their public ovens. Bricks weren't all that easy to come by in those early days, and not everyone had an oven. So Oglethorpe had 2 ovens built here so that those ladies could make their bread, pies, or whatever they needed. And of course, we'd socialize with each other, find out what's going on in the city, who's doing what, where, why, how, and when. If you wanted to know what time of day it was, this is where the sundial was located at. But it was also in this square where they read the Declaration of Independence for the very first time to the citizens of Savannah on August 10, 1776. The monument, the center, is dedicated to General Nathaniel Greene. Now, General Nathaniel Greene was second in command to George Washington during the American Revolutionary War. He was considered to be a brilliant military strategist. He did help us a huge invention for the cotton industry. Prior to that, he had a hand pick the seeds out of the cotton. Very tedious and time-consuming task. Now we're entering Wright Square, named for Sir James Wright, the third and the last royal governor of Georgia. And in the center of this square is a monument to William Washington Gordon, co-founder and president of the Central of Georgia Railroad, and the grandfather of Juliet Gordon. But when they place this monument in this square, y'all, they place it right on top of poor old Tomachichi's grave. The Indian chief that helped him out so much. Oglethorpe even buried him here when he died in 1739 with full military honors. Well, there was someone in the Gordon family decided she had to do something about it. She knew everyone considered Tomachichi to be the co-founder of Georgia. Her name was Nellie Kinsey Gordon. She was the mother of Juliet Gordon Lowe, the daughter-in-law of William Washington Gordon, but also the founder of the Colonial names. One of their duties was to put up historic markers. Originally, Tomachichi only had a small pyramid of stones on his gravesite, so the ladies decided to go big. Look at the corner of the square coming up on our left. They ordered this big granite boulder from Stone Mountain. When it arrived here, they placed that plaque on it, telling you all about how Tomachichi was and still is the co-founder of Georgia. Now look into the trees, and you'll notice there's very little, if any, Spanish moss here. And that's because Wright Square is also known as the Hanging Square. This is the old Chatham County Courthouse here on your left. If you got sentenced to hang, you would have been taken right out of the courthouse into Wright Square where the gallows stood and hanged until you were dead. Now the reason why I point out the lack of Spanish moss is because legend has it that Spanish moss will not grow where innocent blood has been spilled. So that means we had to have made at least one mistake on those hangings. Probably more than that. To your right is Bradley Hall, another one of the buildings restored by SCAT. This was originally built in 1906 as a U.S. Marine Hospital. We have now entered Oglethorpe Square, named for the founder of the colony, General James Edward Oglethorpe. Now, he was the actual designer of the original city plan. Oglethorpe designed it, the city plan to be in a grid pattern, having 24 squares laid out. We were one of the first planned communities in the United States. Coming up on our right is the Owens Thomas House. This is the second house that William J. built. He built this one in 1819. But look at the staircases coming out from the front there. Now those are called open arm staircases, also nicknamed loving arms. Now they were actually designed like that for a reason. You see, back in those days, men were not allowed to see women's things. So the men would go one side, the women go the other side. The first floor walls on that house are 23 inches thick. It keeps the home cool in the summer and warm in the winter. It's like natural air conditioning and heating. That was also the very first house in the state of Georgia to have running water. In fact, that house had running water 20 years for the White House even did. Left is Leopold's Ice Cream, the best ice cream in Georgia, started by three brothers from Greece that came here with their own family recipe. Now it's still July, and Strat Leopold, who was the son of one of the original brothers, is doing a special in July. For your child's 12th brother can recite special teachers and get a free scoop of ice cream. He was also a film producer for many years for Paramount Pictures, so there's a lot of movie memorabilia inside. Now we're going to be pulling in a Sunday at the Davenport House. Built by Isaiah Davenport in 1820, the federal style of architecture at his family home. And in 1965, there's a home down for the parking project. Well, 7 ladies got together and said, oh, no, you don't. They bought the house, restored it to its original state. It's now one of the homes you can tour here in Savannah. This is stop number 8. Foundation that, of course, you could hold fundraisers and get charitable contributions. The Historic Savannah Foundation foundation between 1955 and now has helped save nearly 500 homes and buildings. We have the Keogh House here on your right, now a beautiful bed and breakfast, but originally built by William Keogh in 1897. Take a look at the steps, the railings, the columns, the windowsills, the porches, and the balconies, because almost everything you see on the outside of this house that is not made of brick is actually made of cast iron. That is all painted iron right there. You see, William was the owner of one of the iron foundries, and he used to say, if you can make it with wood, I can make it with iron. So he proved it on his own house there. To your right, the West Military Museum. That museum has all kinds of military memorabilia inside of it and history, going all the way back to the American Revolutionary War and all the way up to Desert Storm. He even has one of Saddam Hussein's general's uniforms. Now we're going to be headed into Green Square next, named for General Nathaniel Greene, who we just got talking about. But this area was the heart of the African American community in the 1800s. Once we get into the square, I want you to look to your left, and you're going to see a pink and brick building with a cross in front of it at the corner. And that is the Second African Baptist Church, right there. The greenhouse across the square there, they built that house for their very first pastor, Henry Cunningham. But that church had two special visitors. One of them's coming up on the speakers.
I have a dream. My four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Now we're going to be headed into South number 9 at the Pirates House. A very good restaurant now, but originally built in 1754 as a saloon for sailors and pirates. Please remain seated until we do come to a complete stop and open up the doors. Let me pull in to stop number 9. It was built in 1751. It's the oldest building in the state of Georgia. It was built for the gardener of the Trustees Gardens. This whole area at one time was the Trustees Gardens. It was the first experimental agricultural station in the United States. It is where we discovered that peaches and cotton would flourish. But it's also where we had a disappointment. England was hoping that we would be able to produce silk. So they, the first year we got told 20 pounds of silk out of the experiment. We sent it back to the Queen. She was able to make one full dress out of it. Now it closed down 3 years later when it got its first hard freeze. And then the Pirates House was built in 1750. Now the Pirates House is considered to be quite haunted also. No windows up on the second floor. It's just used for storage now. If you take pictures in there, a lot of times there's been marks on your pictures. The employees have some wild skills. Now that tunnel has been filled in and sealed up. It's considered to be too dangerous and afraid it might collapse. But I've been down to the wine cellar and you can still see the outline of that tunnel. And it's actually a very big tunnel. I probably could have walked through here almost standing up like that and then it was open. So you can see we're definitely they could have dragged a man right here. But that leads us to our next prohibition. But no rocks, no brandy, or our waters were spirits, basically go liquor. They were not off equal. They did allow the colonists to serve beers, wines, and ale. The prohibition did not last very long here in the colony. It got repealed in 1751. Now hold on, y'all. We're going to be going down our bumpy cobblestone here. And we are headed down to stop number 10, which is the only stop on the riverfront. Now, a lot of people don't realize it, but here in Savannah, we do have the second largest St. Patrick's Day parade in the United States. While we are second only to New York City. Now, on that day, fountains at
bumaba rin
Forsyth
tayo.
Park, a
May
lot of
siguro.
media and everything. And then they do the other fountains after that. But they also tried to dye that River Green one year too. That didn't work out so well for them. For one thing, the Savannah River has an average tidal change of between 6 to 10 feet. So once they dyed the river, once the tide changed, a lot of that tide just went right out into the ocean. But you can still get green eggs, green grits, green ham, and of course lots of green beer. But you know, the next day, you'll always see some green faces after all that green beer too. Oh yeah. Coming up on our right, one of our candy stores. Where I said there was two on River Street. This is one of them. The other one is about 3 blocks behind us. Now we are going to be pulling into stop number 10. And for those of you getting off here, it has been my pleasure and privilege to tell you all about Savannah today. I hope your tour with me has been fun and informative. Tips are greatly appreciated, but please do remain seated until I come to the complete stop and open up the doors as I pull into stop number 10 on the Riverfront. Alrighty, stop number 10.
Baka dito.
And it is now mandated by the city that you do wear your face mask on board the trolley, please. They are giving out fines of up to $50. Okie doke. Look to your left there. That's an island in the middle of the Savannah River. That is Hutchinson Island, and that is part of Georgia. The white building is the Savannah Trading Convention Center. The beige one is the Westland Resort. Both of those were completed in the year 2000. Whereas the buildings on your right were built in mid to late 1800s as cotton warehouses and businesses from ports. Then the Colonial struck time. And our last stop closed down here on the river in 1955. So the buildings basically became vacant, abandoned, and derelict until 1977, when Mayor Riverfront Savannah started the Riverfront Restoration Project. Now River Street has come alive again today with the hustle and bustle of people buying and selling goods of all kinds. Drinking, some drinking like sailors, as we got many fine pubs and taverns. We have all kinds of restaurants, hotels, vacation rentals, and souvenir shops here on River Street. Now to your left is the Savannah River, the natural boundary between Georgia and South Carolina. The river is 400 feet wide and has been dredged to a depth of 42 feet. And that's so we can accommodate 98% of the world's ships. When Oglethorpe arrived here, you know, that river was only 12 feet deep. Next we have the famous statue of the waving girl. Florence Martis was her name. Florence lived on Elba Island with her brother, who was a lighthouse keeper. She used to wave at every single ship that came to port during the day with an apron or towel, like with a lantern. They say she did this for 44 years. Next is the Olympic cauldron. Savannah hosted the 1996 summer yachting events for the Summer Olympics that were held in Atlanta, Georgia. Our cauldron was also lit by the flame from Greece, and it was right here where we held the commemorative services and gave out those gold medals to those lucky winners. And now again, we're going over our bumpy cobblestones. Now y'all, these cobblestones actually used to be ship's ballast stones. See, when the sailors were coming over from England, they weren't really bringing us much cargo, maybe some tea. Mostly people and their belongings, so they needed these stones to weigh them down to get across the Atlantic Ocean. Then once they got here, well, you know, they could load up all the cargo they could find to take back to England, like cotton and rice and indigo. They didn't need the stones anymore. So basically, cooperative and early Irish bakeries. Let me point out some of the monuments. The first one's got a needle on it. That's the Chatham Artillery Monument. They're the oldest military organization in Georgia. Then we have the Vietnam War Memorial, shaped like the country of Vietnam. It has 106 names inscribed on it of the soldiers who lost their lives there from Savannah. And then we have the Celtic Cross, dedicated to our early Irish settlers. We were a port, so we did get some of the settlers from the potato famine. Now we're headed into Warren Square, named for General Joseph Warren. He died in the Battle of Bunker Hill 3 days after he got his commission. We have also just entered the Colonial District, the oldest residential district in Savannah. The home on your right was built in 1806. That kind of grayish one over there to your left, 1791. Now, we do not have very many colonial homes left, and that's partly because of the Great Fire of 1796. That fire destroyed over 2/3 of the city. At the time of the fire, there was a drought going on. The fire started in Mr. Grommett's bakery in the city market. The wind was blowing briskly off the river, so the flames just leapt from rooftop to rooftop. They had such a hard time containing that fire. We lost well over 300 homes and buildings in the Great Fire of 1796. Only 121 were left standing. Now we're headed into Reynolds Square. Named Captain John Reynolds, who was the first royal governor of Georgia. And in the center of this square, you can see a statue of John Wesley. John Wesley was the founder of the Methodist movement. Oglethorpe actually met him in England on one of his many voyages there and back, and he invited him to come here to the colony to preach to the colonists. So he came along with his brother Charles, who was also a minister. They started the first Sunday school for all of North America right here in Savannah, Georgia. Now, directly ahead of us in the next corner is the old Pink House restaurant and tavern. But that was originally built in 1771 as a family home for a man named James Haversham. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but first we're pulling into stop number 11. Please remain seated till we come to the police stop and open up the door here at number 11. They had sharpshooters and we're going to make this light. But anyways, the three boys would actually hold their meeting in the basement. And now we are going to be pulling into stop number 12 at the Exchange Bell. The bell is going to be on our left-hand side once we pull in. And the bell was used to signal the opening and closing of all the shops on River Street at one time. It is the oldest public bell in Georgia. We got it from Amsterdam in 1802. Price for time was set in that building, and Liverpool, England, for the entire world. People made and lost fortunes inside that old cotton exchange there. Now Freemasons Hall, there's what's known as the Wall Street of the South. Next on our right are the Washington guns. George Washington captured those two guns from Cornwall and Savannah, Georgia. We lovingly refer to them as George and Washington. There's an English cannon with a French cannon. And they refused to be dignitaries that would arrive here to the city, but they are no longer in one condition. George Washington actually visited the city of Savannah in 1791 for 3 days. It was the Chatham Artillery that escorted him around the city. It was called the Treaty of Friendship. It was signed in May of 1733. And this treaty basically designated which lands would belong to who. Now the Indians went west to a place called Five Fingers Creek. He gave up all this land to the English, but only with the promise from them that they would never build on top of their ancient Indian burial ground. But of course, eventually what the English do is just that. And it's one of the reasons the city market, if you aren't getting off here, well, it's been my pleasure to tell you all about Savannah. I hope you've enjoyed your tour with me. Tips are greatly appreciated, but please remain seated till we come to a complete stop here and open up the doors. This is stop number 13.
Nakadu niya. Ayan ang amin.
Honor for that. And that's because it's not the original square. Did you call it in? Probably not. That's because it's not the original square. See, what happened was, in 1954, our city fathers decided in their infinite wisdom that we needed a parking garage there instead of the square. You know, 3 at Ellis Square. So they, yellow at 3 and 13. Okay, so, we're back on, so that made everybody happy that way. Now we're headed into Franklin Square. missionary named Benjamin Franklin. He became a shipping agent to the colony in 1768, but in the center of the square is a monument to the Haitians. 400 Haitians came to Savannah during the American Revolutionary War to help us fight off the British. Unfortunately, most of them lost their lives in the siege of Savannah, October 9th, 1779, the second bloodiest battle in the American Revolution. Directly in front of us, the great building with the red doors, is the first African Baptist church. Now that church right there was built entirely by the slaves from the Brampton plantation. What they would do is they would work on the plantation all day long and then come back here at night and work on the church by the light of a bonfire and torches. It's the oldest African American Baptist congregation in the United States, and it was also a stop along the Underground Railroad. The slaves would hide underneath the first floor of the church. He didn't envision the colony in Georgia as being made up of a bunch of family farms, not large plantations for one person on everything. Now, the colonists, they fought him on this, but he stood firm. He told them if they didn't like it, they could just go to another colony. But as it turned out, Oglethorpe ended up returning to England in 1743. And the prohibition got repealed in 1751. But at one time, Georgia was the only one of the original 13 colonies to actually. This was originally built as a family home by William J., the famous architect from Bath, England in 1820. Now, William and Julia Scarborough. William Scarborough was the owner of the steamship Savannah, the first steamship to cross the Atlantic. And Julia was well known around here as having the most lavish parties of anyone in Savannah. And this is now the Ships of the Sea Museum. Please watch your steps as you're getting off and have a good day. Any conversation with your neighbor to whisper, and it's still city mandated that you do wear your face mask on board the trolley, please. Now, in the original city plan of Savannah, we had 24 squares we have. But we now only have 22 intact squares. So where are the other two squares at? Well, one of them is on the second building that's coming up on our left. That is the Chatham County Courthouse. The courthouse is sitting right on top of all things Liberty Square, right? And if you look beyond the trees, you'll see the big brown building. That's the Civic Center. Civic Center is sitting right on top of Elbert Square. But I gotta tell you, we feel quite certain that they are not going to tear down those two buildings, give us back those two squares. So we really do consider Elbert and Liberty to be our two long squares. Man to defend himself, be his own lawyer, and if he couldn't do that for some reason, he could find a friend to do it for him. We're not quite sure when that prohibition was repealed, though. You see, no one, and I mean no one, will admit to being the first square here in Georgia. You see, Oglethorpe had a very good friend of his dying down in prison because of the square. Friend's name is Robert Steele. He was an architect. He went bankrupt and got tossed in a debtor's prison. Well, when Oglethorpe found out about it, he was going to get him out. He was going to pay off his debt. But apparently the lawyer took so long in getting everything done, and his friend ended up contracting smallpox and dying. So he really did blame that lawyer for his very dear friend's death. He wanted swift justice or swift resolution here in the colony. And he felt that lawyers took way too long to do anything for that. Come on, Chris.
Welcome aboard. Hello, my name is Chris Savannah. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and Chief Investor
Here's the comment cards right up here, y'all.
Where you heard about us and who your conductor is. Feel free to give us your comments about the tour and anything else you wish. Then just drop us a line.
That's enough of that. I've got a little example of the comment card here. Like when you're done filling it out, y'all look up here, read it, and memorize it. Alrighty, now we're pulling into stop 15. Now, you know Our next stop will be stop number 1. We're going to pull in though, because we are required to do so, just in case.
Go back there. We should have fucking walked through.
Alright, y'all good? I'm good. Okay, now if you look to your left, that's where you actually get on that big old bridge right there. This is Oglethorpe Avenue. Now the bridge is called the New Talmadge Bridge, and it was completed in 1991 at a cost of $70 million. And that's because the old bridge was actually struck by a ship in the early 1980s. Now the new bridge is 1.43 miles long. Georgia's on this side, South Carolina's on the other side. However, when we built the new bridge, thankfully, we did build it a lot higher than the old bridge. The old bridge was only 137 feet above the level of the river. The new bridge is 185 feet above the level of the river. We were able to bring in much larger ships there for more cargo. We are now the second largest container ship seaport on the East Coast, fifth in the nation. But it took us 5 long years to name that bridge. 5 years of committees and meetings and suggestions. More committees, more meetings, and more suggestions. The name of the old bridge was the Talmadge Bridge. It took us 5 years to rename that bridge the New Talmadge Bridge. They don't call us Savannah around here sometimes for nothing. Now we're going to be heading into what was once the old passenger terminal for the Central and Georgia Railroad. Closed on May 1st, 1971, and now our main visitor center. And this is where sadly everyone will be leaving me. See, we begin our tours at stop 1 and end them at stop 1. It's the only way to get a little bit of a break in between tours. Otherwise, I'd be going round and round and round and never stop talking and never stop driving. So what y'all are going to do is transfer over to the next trolley going out. But there are also 2 museums here. The Railroad Museum, directly ahead of us. Go across the street, you go through those black gates right there. One of the oldest and largest steel standing repair facilities. You get a little train ride too. Then we have the History Museum inside the visitor center with the bench that Forrest Gump sat on. There's also restrooms, a snack bar, and a gift shop in there. Now y'all, it has been my privilege and pleasure to tell you everything I do know about the history of Savannah. And I hope your tour with me today has been fun and informative. Tips are greatly appreciated, but please do remain seated until we come to a complete stop and open up the doors here at stop number 1.
Ito lagi ko na.
That would usually work. Take a picture of it then. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Please watch your step as you get knocked down and hold on to those handrails.